Okay. Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon. My name is Chaim Gottschalk. I am the Hebraica Judaica Cataloging Librarian at the Library of Congress, and I welcome you to the AJL Roundtable, Countering Anti-Semitism and Anti-Israel Propaganda in Children's and Young Adult Literature and Educational Resources, which will be presented today by Marjorie Gunn and Karen Tal-Machlouf of CAMRA. The Association of Jewish Libraries has a zero-tolerance policy regarding harassment, intimidation, retaliation, and discrimination. This includes discrimination made on the basis of race, color, age, sex, gender identity and expression, sexual orientation, pregnancy, national origin, ancestry, disability, medical condition, religion, class, body size, veteran status, marital domestic partnership status, citizenship, religious observance, and any other marginalized identity. The Association of Jewish Libraries is an international professional organization that fosters access to information and research in all forms of media relating to all things Jewish. We provide professional advocacy and development to our members via a supportive worldwide network. We are not a political organization, and the views and opinions expressed in this event today does not necessarily reflect the views of the AJL, its leadership, or its members. So you should know today's event will be recorded. And if you don't want your profile to be or your image to be recorded, just turn your camera off. Now I introduce Janie, and who will introduce both Marjorie and Karen. Thank you.
Thank you, Chaim. Thank you for joining us today, everybody. We're thrilled to have you here for what promises to be an engaging and enlightening session. My name is Janie Finkelstein. I'm a senior education analyst for the CAMRA Education Institute, and I'll be facilitating today's event. After the end of the presentation, we will have a question and answer section. We'll be glad to have questions saved to be posted in the chat during the Q&A. And now I'm honored to introduce Marjorie Gunn. Marjorie, our first speaker for today. Marjorie Gunn is a Canadian author of nonfiction books for middle grade and young adult readers, including 5,000 Years of Slavery, recognized as a 2012 notable book for a global society by the International Reading Association, and Speak a Word for Freedom, Women Against Slavery. Her essay, How Teaching the Full History of World Slavery Frees Us from Selective Guilt, appeared in the 1867 project, Why Canada Should Be Cherished, Not Cancelled, published by the Aristotle Foundation for Public Policy. She currently reviews books about Israel for children and young adults for the CAMRA Education Institute. She's program chair for AJL Canada. And now I'm going to pass it to Marjorie.
Thank you very much, Jenny, for your generous introduction. And thanks to Chaim and AJL for welcoming us today. I spoke at the AJL conference in LA in 2019 about anti-Israel propaganda in children's books. 5 years have passed since then, and as I think we all recognize, the Jewish world has changed. Indeed, the issues I raised back then are far more pressing today. This afternoon, I'm going to talk about something insidious that is happening in two worlds that I inhabit. The first is education. I was an elementary teacher for 35 years, and having committed my heart and soul to the profession, it tears me apart to see the world of education debased as it is today.
And do my thing by memory. Wow.
Please mute yourselves while Marjorie and Karen are presenting.
It tears me apart to see the world of education debased as it is today, manipulated to indoctrinate children in various ideologies, one of these being against Israel. The second is the world of children's books. I wrote 3 nonfiction books for young adults, and over the years, I've reviewed many books, fiction and nonfiction. Now I'm seeing that literary world closed to any writer who dares to use the I word, Israel, positively. So what I want to give you in the next 15 minutes is a granular picture of how this is engineered. That is, how anti-Israel curricular resources and lesson plans are smuggled into schools under a human rights camouflage, and how these curricula and some diversity and social justice websites promote children's books to warp children's minds. As I talk, you will notice that I make no distinction between anti-Israel and anti-Semitic. Now, this is because whatever the high-toned academics say, on the ground, anti-Semitism virtually always employs anti-Semitic tropes and thus devolves into anti-Semitism. Next slide, please. I'd like to start with something reported by Israeli media on October 30th, in the aftermath of the October 7th massacre. An attractive young West Bank woman with a striking mane of gold hair, a woman named Ahed Tamimi, proclaimed the following: "We are waiting for you in all the West Bank cities from Hebron to Jenin. We will slaughter you, and you will say that what Hitler did to you was a joke. We will drink your blood and eat your skull. Come on, we are waiting for you." Now, Ahed Tamimi isn't just any Palestinian. Born into the terrorist Tamimi family, she has been packaged for the media. CNN did a positive feature on her as a pacifist martyr who was unjustly imprisoned by Israel. And she tells her story in her autobiography, which you see on the slide, co-authored with Dina Takruri. They Call Me a Lioness, a Palestinian girl's fight for freedom. Next slide. You can read my full review of her book on the biased books page of the Camera Education Institute. And by the way, the books that I'm specifically referring to in my talk, they're all on that page. Although Tamimi cites Gandhi and Martin Luther King as formative influences on what she claims to be her family's belief in nonviolent resistance, this is untrue. Here are the facts about Tamimi. She appeared in 2015 at the third Beirut conference of the Global Campaign to Return to Palestine, an umbrella group for Palestinian solidarity organizations, many of which support terrorism. At this conference, she was photographed with representatives of Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and Hezbollah. In September of 2017, at a European Parliament-hosted conference in Brussels, she sat on a panel with terrorist airline hijacker Leila Khaled of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. Yet, back in 2021, when I submitted a comment on the Palestinian books page of Multicultural Children's Book Day, which is now Read Your World, explaining why they should not be promoting Tamimi's book, since she's not a good model for young readers, my comment was suppressed. You can also find Tamimi's book promoted, by the way, on the Social Justice Books website. What I'm going to demonstrate now is a deliberate program to infiltrate the kidlit world and poison the minds of young readers against Israel. Let's take a look at this website, teachpalestine.org. In Toronto, where I live, a link to this website was actually distributed in May of 2021 by a student equity advisor with the Toronto District School Board in the wake of Israel's incursion into Gaza in 21. It's made headway, this curriculum, this page, in California schools as well. So Teach Palestine's resources and lesson plans are getting into teachers' hands. To teach students about Palestine, this website provides a convenient page of pro-Palestinian books, and among these is Ahed Tamimi's autobiography. But you need to know something else about the Teach Palestine initiative. It's a product of Mecca, the Mideast Children's Alliance, a radical pro-Palestinian organization which raised $75,000 in 2009 for a viciously anti-Semitic British MP. Teach Palestine is coordinated by Jody Socolower. You can see her book under the picture of the children there. Her book, Determined to Stay, pushes a whole constellation of lies about Israel, accusing it of hoarding Palestinian water, distorting archaeology, trying to take over the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and much more. All of these accusations are conclusively debunked in my camera review. Socolower also presented at an educational conference in 2021 where she connected Jews with right-wing white supremacy. Now let's look at a representative sample of titles from this site and from other educational organizations and book promotion websites. Next slide. Let's start with Hannah Mushabek's Homeland. Mushabek's Homeland, My Father Dreams of Palestine, invokes her father's memories of growing up in the old city of Jerusalem. In this two-page spread, next slide. In this two-page spread, it shows language balloons in Greek, English, and Arabic of the people on a streetscape. Was no Hebrew spoken in the old city? There's none there. Were no Jews ethnically cleansed in 1948 from Jerusalem, the city that boasts a continuous Jewish presence for over 3,000 years? Next slide. So Mushabek's Palestinian family owns Interlink Books, and its children's book imprint, Crocodile, publishes a lot of pro-Palestinian books. The infamous Amazing Women of the Middle East, which some of you probably know from the controversy that happened a few years ago. Well, this book, with its map of the region that labels Israel as Palestine, and which includes 0 Jewish women, is one of them. Well, Mushabek's Instagram reaction to the October 7th pogrom exposes her moral compass. Next slide. Here's an excerpt. You can read it on the slide. So she says, when you reframe what's happening, you understand why people would retaliate, why people would resist. Notice how she places the violence in Gaza, not in Israel. And notice how she employs the terms retaliate and resist to explain away rape, decapitation, and burning alive. Here are 2 more picture books that you see very often being promoted. P is for Palestine features the memorable line, I is for Intifada, which it defines this way. Intifada is Arabic for rising up for what is right if you are a kid or a grown-up. But the Palestinians who rose up for what is right, in her words, in the Second Intifada, weren't performing a Middle Eastern version of the 1965 Selma to Montgomery March. Theirs was a violent uprising targeting innocent Israeli civilians. They murdered over 1,000 of them, naming and injuring many more. Next slide. And in Baba, what does my name mean? All Hebrew place names, which we recognize from the Bible and which predate the Arabic names, are erased on the map of Palestine as the main character takes her magical tour through the country. Now, it's not only the case that Jewish place names are erased. we as a nation are erased. Take a look at this seemingly innocent book, a celebration of Palestinian culture and tradition, according to the title. Yes, the book does indeed celebrate Palestinian foods, Palestinian dance, Palestinian poets. But near the end is a chapter on ancient history. And this is what you'll find in the Did You Know sidebar on that page. Did you know? Over the last few thousand years, many groups and people have ruled over the land we know as Palestine. Assyrians, Babylonians, Persians, Greeks, Romans, Arabs, Fatimids, Seljuk Turks, Crusaders, Egyptians, and Mamelukes, all at one point or another laid claim to this significant location. I'm sure you noticed who's missing. The book also has a section on religions of the region, devoting a 2-page spread to Islam and another 2-page spread to Christianity. Guess whom they leave out? Jews are mentioned only in passing a few times. Now, this should come as no surprise, as there's been an insidious process in Middle East studies of erasing Jewish history in the land of Israel, accusing Israel of twisting archaeology to create our narrative and of denying, and it denies the biblical account, or they read it backwards as a later construct. We know, for example, that Yasser Arafat shocked President Bill Clinton by denying that there was ever a Jewish temple on the Temple Mount. Since Western civilization is rooted in the Hebrew Bible, this is not just an attack on Judaism, but on the Judeo-Christian West. Next slide. In Ida in the middle, Ida comes to appreciate her Palestinian identity, but Palestinians are presented as forever passive victims. Their terrorism is invisible. So here's something you need to know about the book's author, Nora Lester Murad. Like Mushabek, she posted herself on Instagram after October 7th, in this case, tearing down hostage posters. Her lengthy statement, as you can see it up there, explains the violence away with the words, "It didn't come out of nowhere," accusing Israel of apartheid and ethnic cleansing. As the librarians and authors here certainly know, book promotion sites are important. Unfortunately, some of these are being used by anti-Israel players to promote anti-Israel books to librarians and bookstores. So let's look at 3. Here is Read Your World, formerly known as Multicultural Children's Book Day. The Read Your World website promotes multiculturalism in children's books, and I became embroiled in a prolonged correspondence with Mia Wenjen, the founder of this site, when I noticed they called me a lioness and Ida in the middle being promoted on a page of Palestinian books. I attempted, as I told you, to post a comment about the Tamimi book and was blocked. So Mia contacted me asking me to get in touch with Nora Lester Murad, who had curated that page. And I explained that the problem wouldn't be solved that way. And that the problem was that Multicultural Children's Book Day had chosen to host a page promoting a terrorist collaborator, an unfit model for young readers. Mia invoked freedom to read and free speech principles. And I explained that denying me the right to post the absolutely factual information that Ahad Tamimi supported terrorism denied me freedom of speech. In the end, she pulled the page due to a letter writing campaign from parents. And ultimately, she promised me that I could post once civilians were no longer being attacked in Gaza. I explained that that was up to Hamas, but that's not the end of it. In her incarnation as pragmatic mom, and that's what this page is, Mia links from Read Your World to a page titled Challenging Erasure, Books for Kids That Talk About Palestine by Alice Rothschild, who has a long association with the extremist anti-Israel organization, Jewish Voice for Peace. Rothschild recommends Ida in the Middle among many other anti-Israel titles. I submitted my objections on that page, and on July 25th, true to her word, Nia did post my criticisms of the suggested books. So persistence did pay off. Next slide. This is a very popular site. We Need Diverse Books. Hannah Mushabek, who, as you heard, excused the vicious October 7th pogrom as a form of resistance, curated the page 12 children's and YA books by Palestinian authors for them. I sent emails to Eleanor and Carolyn Richmond objecting to several of the recommended books and have had no response. But while WNDB seems to be unwilling to deal with my objections, they announced on December 11th, 2 months after the pogrom, the following. WNDB is pledging its support to the Palestinian writing community in the American diaspora. So starting in early 2024, they undertook to provide grants and thousands of dollars to unpublished Palestinian American writers and to, quote, donate book bundles by Palestinian American creators to schools and libraries. Are they sending books to any communities in the Gaza envelope who've lost all the books in their homes, destroyed by fire, together with their inhabitants who were slaughtered in a manner reminiscent of the Spanish Inquisition? No sign of that. So currently, CAMRA is considering next steps with We Need Diverse Books. The Social Justice Books site also promotes problematic books. I used their feedback feature to register complaints about 17 of their listed books. I've had no reply from them. So now over to Karen, who will discuss recommended books and also CAMRA's work on this issue.
Thank you, Marjorie. And now I am honored to present Karen Tal-Makluf. Karen works as an education analyst for the CAMRA Education Institute. She's a member of the Literature Project team, where she helps select and recommend children's and young adult titles for the Education Institute. As a mother of 3 elementary-age Jewish children of Ashkenazi and Libyan heritage, she's deeply concerned about growing anti-Semitism and anti-Israel bias in schools. She's passionate about ensuring that students have a solid foundation in Jewish and Israeli history so that they will be prepared to combat anti-Semitism in the wider world. Karen holds a BA degree in Judaic Studies. Karen, I'm passing it to you.
Thank you, Janie. And thank you, Marjorie. Today, I will be giving an example of how these anti-Israel books are getting into the hands of students via activist teachers. I'll be focusing on one activist in particular who is viewed by educators as a leader in English language arts and social justice in K-12 schools. Then I will discuss the CAMRA Education Institute's work to combat anti-Semitism in K-12 education. I will discuss 3 books that are featured on the Education Institute's K-12 literature list that provide an accurate representation of Israel and its history. It's an excellent resource to share with students, parents, and educators. Finally, I will share how the Education Institute is working to support parents, students, and teachers to combat anti-Semitism in schools. Now, as a mother of 3 children, I've personally seen how the various ideologies, which Marjorie mentioned, are seeping into classrooms and being used to indoctrinate children. Becoming a parent is one of the most rewarding and challenging roles a person will ever have. But being a parent today in 2024 means that you face challenges that would have been unheard of 20 years ago. A teacher's job used to be clearly understood, and parents could trust sending their children to school to learn the 3 R's: reading, writing, arithmetic, as well as content knowledge. Unfortunately, there are teachers today who believe it is their right to indoctrinate impressionable students with their personal political agendas and emotionally manipulative classroom pedagogy. Teachers take this role of injecting their dogma by presenting a one-sided account and do so under the auspices of social justice to give legitimacy to their agenda. The academic rigor takes a backseat to their goal of hammering in their agenda, and Sasson Jaber embodies the very type of activist teacher I'm referring to. Next slide, please. Sasson Jaber is currently serving as the English department chair in a Midwestern high school. Jaber consistently uses her position of authority in the classroom, in leadership committees, and at educators' conferences, overstepping professional boundaries and injecting her anti-Israel activism. She is outspoken about her intent to influence her students towards an anti-Israel belief and boasts of the long-lasting effect she has had on her students even after graduating from her classroom. In one podcast, Jaber brags that her students continue their activism on their college campuses by participating in causes rooted in social justice, including pro-Palestinian tent encampments. Witnesses of these encampments report expressions of explicit support for Hamas and cultish chants for the eradication of the Jewish state and its population. Jaber uses her position as a member of numerous committees and boards to influence educators. She's a member of the National Council for Teachers of English, NCTE, Committee Against Racism and Bias, and a former member of the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Standards Committee, and is a founder of the Arab American Education Network. She speaks at dozens of conferences every year where she admits that she interjects a quote-unquote Palestinian narrative whenever she can, and how receptive educators have been to her presentations. On November 15th, 2023, one day before the start of the NCTE conference, the committee she served on issued a statement in solidarity with Palestinians' quote, right to self-determination and justice and standing against genocide. After an outcry over such controversial politics, NCTE's leadership issued a clarifying statement explaining that the Anti-Racism and Bias Committee's statement was unauthorized by NCTE leadership and was not published by NCTE or its leadership team. But we are unaware of any disciplinary action against her or any other member of the committee for their defamatory accusations against Israel. Next slide, please. At educator conferences, she also promotes the very same biased books that Marjorie discussed earlier and encourages teachers to incorporate them into their classrooms. For example, at last year's NCTE conference, Jaber recommended They Called Me a Lioness and other books from anti-Zionist activists. Furthermore, she created and mailed over 400 educators' packages to teachers across the country. Her packages were intended to educate teachers about the Palestinian perspective and included biased books from anti-Israel activists. Jaber publicly posted that her only request would be that educators share her free materials with students and other teachers. One teacher who received one of her educators' packages remarked on social media how excited he was to incorporate what he had received into his classroom. Jaber continually appropriates the struggles of other minorities to manipulate her students and educators to believe that Palestinian history must be taught along with African American, Hispanic, and Native American history under an intersectional umbrella of historically marginalized groups. It is only through Jaber's fabricated lens of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict that she is able to exploit her position of power to continually interject Palestinian victimhood as a focal point in her presentations, podcasts, and classrooms. The manipulation and piggybacking on the struggles of other minorities in order to interject her anti-Israel agenda was on display during last year's NCTE conference. Jaber presented several times with such titles as Parallels on the Journey to Freedom, Black and Palestinian Solidarity, Palestine, We Teach Life, Reviving a Narrative, and Palestine and Gaza, Making the Invisible Visible. To read more about Jaber and how prolific she is, you can read the Education Institute's full report on our website. We're also going to add the link to the full report in the chat box at the end of the presentation. Next slide, please. As shown here, she presents falsehoods and blames Israel for all issues with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in several main ways. She inverts the attitudes and intentions of the two sides in the conflict by presenting the Israelis as inhumane and intent on causing harm to the Palestinians, and the Palestinians as their blameless victims. According to Jaber, even Palestinian terrorism, including the atrocities committed by Hamas on October 7th, was justified and a form of resistance. Borrowing fashionable Marxist jargon, she portrays Zionism as a settler colonialist movement that steals Palestinian land. In one of her webinars, Jaber uses time-sequenced maps that purport to show Israel gobbling up Palestinian land. The map perpetuates a falsehood because most of the land was never owned by Palestinian Arabs. In centuries preceding Israel's establishment, the Ottoman Turkish Empire controlled the land. Jaber also engages in an abhorrent genocide inversion by accusing Israel of committing genocide and ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians, and comparing the defensive action of Israel's army to Nazi atrocities committed during the Holocaust. In a social media post, she featured a cartoon of Israeli soldiers perched on high walls labeled with the Star of David that contain a swastika inside of it, and they are shooting at Palestinian civilians who cannot escape. In fact, the Palestinian leadership collaborated with the Nazis and pleaded with Hitler to extend his mass murder of the Jews to the Middle East. It's a fair question to ask why Jaber centers the Israeli-Palestinian conflict as the optimal subject to study for American students above all other foreign conflicts. Palestinian Americans account for only about 0.1% of the population and have not yet made the contribution to American culture that waves of other immigrant groups have made, such as the Irish, Italians, Jews, Swedes, and many others. Moreover, studies show that Americans are ignorant of American history, as reported in an LA Times article last year. Most Americans don't know which countries we fought against in World War II. In the recent National Assessment of Education Progress, known as America's Report Card, only 22% of students were found to be proficient in civics. Maybe that's what students should be studying. Next slide, please. In order to address the growing anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism in American education, the Camera Education Institute was established to support parents, educators, students, and community members to promote accurate information about Israel, its history, Zionism, and the Jewish people. The Education Institute monitors, researches, and exposes anti-Israel material. The Education Institute also holds institutions accountable. For example, NCTE's Committee Against Racism and Bias recently declared that NCTE as an organization stood in solidarity with the Palestinian people and against genocide. The Education Institute issued a letter to NCTE demanding a corrective action plan to prevent such biased statements and false claims about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict from being made in the future. NCTE's executive director responded to the letter, said it would be shared with NCTE officers. However, we need more help from librarians and educators to follow up with NCTE and to hold them accountable. We are also presenting our work focused on K-12 schools at educator conferences this fall, including NCTE. Next slide, please. The Education Institute also produced a modular curriculum called The Story of the Jewish People in the Land of Israel that aligns with state social studies standards. The curriculum situates Jewish history in the larger context of Middle Eastern and world history. With this curriculum, students will understand how the geography and the development of religious, cultural, and political movement from ancient to modern times have created a complex society in Israel. Lessons utilize a wide range of primary sources, secondary sources, videos, and maps. It can be found on the Education Institute website and available for parents, students, and educators. Next slide, please. As Marjorie mentioned earlier, she researches and reviews anti-Israel bias books, which are found on the Education Institute's website. Marjorie's review of the book, A Little Piece of Ground, was presented by Jewish community members and parents advocating to remove the book from a New Jersey district's English curriculum and a classroom in a Virginia public school district. I have also used Marjorie's book review when advocating for these types of books to not be spotlighted in the children's room of my local town library. In addition to the Education Institute's anti-Israel biased book section, we have researched and curated a list of fiction and nonfiction K-12 recommended literature with accurate representation of Israel, its history, Zionism, and current events. Educators, parents, and librarians are using books from this list to strengthen students' knowledge and connection to Israel. We also have a few pilot projects. We have an initiative to donate 10 elementary school books from our recommended literature list to 10 elementary public school libraries. We are also meeting with book authors to discuss the challenges of publishing their books and plan to create media pieces from author interviews. And finally, we are researching the reasons behind the limited number of books that accurately represent Israel, its history, and how children's books are being selected for libraries and schools. Now I'd like to focus on the K-12 recommended literature list curated by the Education Institute. I'm going to share 3 books from CAMRA's recommended literature list that would be excellent to share with students. Next slide, please. Thank you. The first book I want to share is called Under the Domim Tree, a historical novel first published in Hebrew in 1992. The author, acclaimed Israeli actress Gila Almagor, wrote the story based on her life growing up in a youth village in 1950s Israel. In the years that followed World War II, many Jewish children who had become orphans during the Holocaust made their way to Israel, and the Israeli government established youth villages or boarding schools to care for them. Under the Domim Tree takes place in one of these youth villages and centers around the relationships of 3 teenagers named Avia, Yola, and Mira, and their struggles to overcome the traumas from their past. The teenagers and their friends form deep bonds with one another and support one another as they share the common thread of having experienced profound tragedy and sorrow during their young lives. It's a beautifully written book that won the National Jewish Book Award and is a Publisher's Weekly Starred Review. Those who read this book will gain historical insight to the plight of young Holocaust refugees who immigrated to Israel and the communities created to support them. This book is featured in CAMRA's high school literature list. Next slide, please. The next book I would like to share will help educate the reluctant reader about Jewish history. Unfortunately for some people, learning about history from standard textbooks can be unappealing to many youth, and that's why I'm recommending The Amazing History of the Jews by Chaya Burstein. This graphic novel gives an overview of major events and periods in Jewish history, from the First and Second Temples, expulsions, Jewish life in Spain, Arab lands, Europe, America, and the Holocaust, as well as the establishment of the State of Israel and its subsequent wars. I can personally attest that my son was able to correctly answer a question from our rabbi during the high holidays after he recalled a page from this book. The drawings are engaging, and the summaries cover the most important aspects of Jewish history without losing the reader's attention. Next slide, please. The last book I would like to share is the translated diary of an Israeli girl named Bat Chen. Bat Chen was tragically murdered by a suicide bomber on her 15th birthday in Tel Aviv back in 1996. Bat Chen was a precocious teenager and talented writer. After she was murdered, her parents and friends collected her writings and drawings, which they turned into this published book. The Bat Chen diaries include her correspondence with an Arab pen pal whom she met during a peace program she participated in, a sympathy letter to Yitzhak Rabin's widow after he was assassinated, and her journal entries and poems that express her yearning for peace and coexistence, as well as teenage angst regarding relationships and young love. Bat Chen's ability to express her hopes, dreams, and frustrations through her writings not only demonstrates her maturity, but epitomizes the sentiments of the Israeli people who, despite experiencing never-ending wars and terrorist attacks, are always yearning for peace with their Palestinian neighbors. In a time when the Jewish state and Israelis are continually demonized, the Bat Chen diaries will move readers and help humanize Israelis through the spirit of this young Israeli girl whose life was tragically cut short. Next slide, please. Now, although I focus my presentation on Sasson Jaber, she is one of many teacher activists who seek to use children's books to indoctrinate students with their personal ideological agendas. It's a breach of trust between parent and teacher to know that some educators will use the professional position to overstep and teach a false account. As a community member, I've personally seen biased books in my local town libraries. When I saw the biased book, The Amazing Women of the Middle East, on display in the children's room of my local town library, I was successfully able to advocate to have it removed from the display case after using one of Marjorie's reviews. Now, we at the Education Institute are not endorsing removing books from library collections. What we are advocating for is to educate and inform librarians about putting biased books on display. And we want to help librarians become more knowledgeable so they are not unintentionally perpetuating an anti-Israel account. As parents, patrons, librarians, and educators who support Israel, we must do our part by advocating to keep these biased books out of the hands of impressionable youth and offer accurate literature that correctly represents the history of Israel and its people. If you come across biased books in your field of work, reach out to the Camera Education Institute at schools@camera.org and help us continue to expose and combat anti-Semitism in education. The Education Institute is here to provide you with the support needed to be advocates for Israel and the Jewish people. Thank you for taking the time to attend our presentation today. We're going to add a link to a handout in the chat box that includes QR codes that will take you to the recommended literature list and problematic book section. And we will also add the link to the full report written about Jaber. So now we're going to move to the question section of the webinar. Thank you very much. Oh, Jenny, you're on mute.
Jenny, unmute.
About that. Thank you. Thank you, Marjorie and Karen, for such an enlightening presentation. And now we're going to move to the question and answer section of our webinar. We have already a few questions posted. So the first one, as librarians, what proactive measures can we take to handle the inclusion of these biased books in our collections or address requests for their inclusions? Marjorie, would you like to?
Sure.
Talk a little bit?
I think one of the most important things is to communicate with librarians. Librarians often rely on the reviews in Kirkus, in SLJ, Publishers Weekly, and what they're not so often aware of is that the reviewers themselves, even Jewish reviewers, are not necessarily well informed on the history of Zionism. And so therefore, when they review a book, they review it in terms of relatability, how well it's written, how gripping the story is, but they may not know that many of the facts presented are incorrect. So it's important for that to enlighten them about that. And I actually had that experience. A few of us from Toronto spoke with the acquisitions librarian at the Toronto Public Library about this issue. So they need a little education. And I don't expect that they will sit down and read a long history of Israel like Daniel Gordis's. But when we spoke to them, actually, we recommended Noah Tishby's book, Israel, A Simple Guide to the Most Misunderstood Country on Earth, to give them some grounding. We also, as Karen mentioned, we don't necessarily want books removed or banned, but you can make a request that it not be a particularly promoted book. That's another thing you can do.
Thank you. Thank you, Marjorie. And we have a related question. So what indicators should we look for in children's and young adult literature to identify potential bias regarding Israel?
So yeah, that's the key one, is to give the librarians the red flags. I'd say erasure of Israel from a map is a red flag. So you could say, if you're the acquisitions librarian, look at the map. The erasure of the Jewish presence, as we saw with that sidebar from We Are Palestinian, the Jewish presence in the history of the Middle East was erased. So that's something to watch for. I think the consistent representation of Palestinians in the story as helpless victims is another one. Oh, and the erasure of the presence of Jews and Jewish history from the Middle East is another one, because in the book Amazing Women of the Middle East, for example, there are 25 biographies, and not one of them was of a Jewish woman. And Jews lived everywhere in the Middle East and North Africa. That's the MENA, MENA population. So that's another one to watch out for. Presenting Israelis only as soldiers. In the book A Little Piece of Ground, that was finally removed from the curriculum in Newark, New Jersey, there's not a good Israeli in the book. All the Israelis are soldiers and they're brutes. So that's another one to watch for. So you can tell librarians that.
Thank you, Marjorie. Karen, it might be a good idea to just sort of remind us, like, what is the insight of the issue of book banning and what is our stance in this practice?
Oh, okay. Well, Camera, we do not advocate for book banning. We do not want books to be removed from, library collections. We're just advocating that librarians use good judgment when selecting books, that accurately represent Israel.
Thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, and I
Karen,
just wanted to say, to use good judgment when you're putting books on display, because those are the books that patrons see when they first walk into libraries.
And there is a question regarding if we've come across, any reviews of Palestinian books that we think are not problematic. And, we know that there's also a way for us to think about. So how do we approach authentic memoirs written by Palestinians in our collection? So Marjorie, would you like to talk about this particular subject?
So first of all, I'd be happy to see them. And if anybody wants to send me the titles of any ones that they think are, present them both sides fairly. There is one, I don't know if it's still in print. It was called A Dog of Knots. And I'm just drawing a blank on the author's name, but it was a charming book. A little girl growing up in Haifa. I think the Yom Kippur War breaks out in the middle of it, and it's a very, very good relations. Of course, Haifa's sort of a model area, but very good relations between the Jewish and the Arab communities there, and the little girl moves between the two. I think you have to watch out for books that purport to be fair. And one of the devices, one of the motifs for that is the friendship between a Palestinian child and an Israeli child. And that you scrape beneath the surface, it's a forced device, but it's also often a forced equivalence. So this book, and it was published just a couple of years ago by HarperCollins, Wishing Upon the Same Stars. It's a friendship in New Mexico, I think, or Texas, between a Palestinian girl and an Israeli girl. But it makes a moral equivalence between the Shoah and what the Palestinians call the Nakba, and it states that quite clearly. It makes an absolute equivalence between the two. And however bad displacement was for the Palestinians, it was not the equivalent of the Shoah. So I gave it a very negative review, even though it purported to show both sides. There's somebody put the details of the Dog of Knots up there.
Wow, there's so many interesting questions. Thank you, everybody, for all your comments and your question. Somebody has asked about the Jewish Book Council, that they have a form for writers to report anti-Semitic incidents experienced in the publishing world. Can anybody share what the objective of that project is? I'm not sure if perhaps Chaim or Marjorie are familiar with that. I'm not familiar, and Karen, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Jewish
Yeah,
book.
no, I'm not familiar either. Marjorie, maybe you might be able to answer.
I just know that it's sometime in the wake of October 7th, they posted a request for anyone having difficulties in the publishing world to refer the incidents with them, and it was a form on their website. Yeah.
Yeah, somebody also asked an interesting question that we at the Camera Education Institute always grapple with, whether it's in person in our reports or presentations, and that is about educating the public, Jewish and non-Jewish, about the origins of the term Palestine. And so, you know, for example, the example posted in the question is the historical lie claiming that Golda Meir as Palestinian sent the passport and other documents before 1948 used Palestine. So Marjorie or Karen, would you like to talk perhaps about your experiences with this particular topic?
Well,
I think, go ahead, Marjorie.
Go ahead, Karen. No, you go.
I just wanted to say, I think that it's something that, you know, takes research on the person who's interested to have, you know, you need to have the background knowledge in order to explain a lot of, at the time, Palestine, you know, it was a geographic area and it was generally known to encompass all the peoples that lived in that region. But, you know, depending on who you ask, more specifically, the Jewish community there was always known as the land of the Jews, although it was called Palestine. And everything that had the name Palestine on was associated with Jewish founders, whether it be the Palestine Post, you know, the newspaper at the time, or the Palestine Philharmonic Orchestra that, you know, ended up being the Israeli Philharmonic Orchestra. It always originated with a Jewish connotation to it. And Marjorie, I don't know if you want to add more to that.
No, I was going to mention those two. And there's a very, very good essay, which I think people can find, on the evolution of the term Palestine by the great Middle East scholar, he's dead now, but Bernard Lewis. If somebody is interested, you can send me an email and I'll see if I can find the link to that.
Thank
but
you.
It goes back to the Philistines, and it was, the term goes back to the Philistines, and it was the term that the Romans used after they destroyed the Second Temple. It's definitely pre-Arab.
And it's something that we also always incorporate when it's relevant in our reports, especially related to education. But it's something that at times you may find other people that are convinced of a different narrative to have sort of resistance to really hearing about the true historical events about the term. So the next question is, along the lines of the books on Palestinians, do we have any recommendations of books that depict both Palestinians and Israelis fairly, or suggestions that, what can we suggest to schools or libraries to replace? Are we asking them to replace these anti-Israel books? What is sort of our stance and experience in this area? Marjorie and Karen, if both of you have had experiences with this and thoughts on this.
You know, I again, it's complicated because we don't want to ban books. And what do you do when the book's already in the library? And, you know, I think all you can do is pretty much point out, you know, why this book is problematic and try to offer an alternative. And certainly, you know, you can go to the Camera Education Institute's recommended literature list, and you can email us at schools@camera.org and ask us for particular recommendations if you want, you know, books of a particular nature, whether it's focusing on, you know, ancient history or modern history. And we can help, you know, guide you in that direction to recommend, you know, a book to your school or library.
Thank you.
But I do think that book by Kathy Walden Kaplan, somebody found the title, The Dog of Knots. I don't know if the book is still in print, but it does a very nice job of showing the mixed Arab and Jewish relationships, the cordial relationships in Haifa in around the time just before the Yom Kippur War broke out. That's a very good one, and it's not forced and fake the way this one was. And Tamar Stein does bend over backwards, even in her accounts of the wars. She bends over backwards to humanize the enemy, like the Egyptians in her book on the Yom Kippur War. She does a very good job with that.
Thank you. There's also, as I'm thinking about, do we have any books in our collection that really places Jews in the land of Israel, the connection of Jews being indigenous to the land of Israel? And because we find children's books about ancient Mayans and in Egypt and ancient Greece, but do we also have books on ancient Israel and the connection of Jews to the land of Israel dating to that time?
Yeah, we have several books that, tie modern day Israel to the Jewish ingenuity. We have the Miracle Seed. I'm just looking right now on the screen. The Miracle Seed, which is the true story how Israeli scientists brought back to life the once extinct Judean palm tree. And we have several books that talk about archaeological sites of modern people coming and digging up in an archaeological site in Israel and finding something amazing, and the story goes back in time. There is, where is it? The Golden Bell, I believe it is. That's one story. And what's the title is escaping me, Jenny, Tamar Stein's book taking place, an archaeological dig.
Yes.
Yeah.
Let me look for it very quickly. It's one of the new books, The Treasure of Tel Maresha.
Yes, that one. We have
Yes.
another one called, yeah.
Do you want to talk a little bit about that book, Karen?
That one's a story that goes from modern to ancient times. A girl who is begrudgingly taken on an archaeological dig in Israel, and then the story goes back in time to that same site, but over 2,000 years ago, to the community that was living there. So it's very nice. It's a very nice story.
I would like to suggest another. I think Anna Levine is here with us, and Anna's book, Running on Eggs, is a friendship between an Arab girl. Both are runners, an Arab girl and an Israeli girl, and in relation to that question about books that treat both sides fairly and don't dehumanize each other. That's another one.
Thank you. There is a question about how do we undo the damage, given that there's all these anti-Semitic books that have been taught, and at least in the current generation, and reinforced in other courses in universities, and definitely we see it under, social justice, racial justice sort of umbrella. If we don't recommend removing and banning the books that are biased and anti-Semitic, then how are we going to see campaigns pressing for more of these stories with true, accurate accounts of Israel, the connection of Jews to the land of Israel, and current events, especially as publishers and funders are pressing for the agenda of the opposite, more sort of an umbrella that doesn't encompass Jews and definitely not Israel under social and racial justice, called really the woke, quote unquote, woke agenda. Can you talk a little bit?
It's a tough one.
I think one of the reasons that it's gotten as big as it's gotten is because, so many of us were sleeping and not paying attention. And I think if we want to, we have to counter what's happening, we have to be a lot more active in our communities and speak up and, do our part to be advocates for Israel, the Jewish people. We have to reach out to organizations that are doing good work, organizations like Camera, and expose what's happening. We can't, we can't hide it under the rug anymore. We have to expose it. We have to talk about it. We have to make sure that our neighbors know what's happening. And we just have to keep the communication open.
Thank you. I don't know if there are any closing questions. Somebody asked, where can we find a setting to continue to have this conversation? There seems to be a lot of interest to continue to think about, as librarians, educators, book writers, thinking about how do we resolve this issue that we're finding in public school libraries, in public libraries around us. And there seems to be a need for more of this sort of setting. So perhaps, I don't know if Chaim or Marjorie would like to share some thoughts on that.
Well, I think local action is what's needed. And I noticed there's a few people who've joined us from the new Canadian parents group, JEFA. And I think this is the kind of issue that they need to work on. What are the books actually being used in the classroom? But the other issue is much larger. It's the amount of freedom and latitude that is given to individual teachers within classrooms as curriculum has become less and less focused on content. It tends to be organized around idealistic platitudes, and you can excuse anything you want to bring into a classroom as under a human rights or a diversity umbrella. And so people need to also address their state, I guess, in the US and their provincial governments and organized curricula that give teachers too much latitude as to what they bring into the classrooms. They have an awful lot of freedom. They can bring any books in. They print stuff off the internet. They bring in videos that are offensive. And that is something that also needs to be addressed. But I think that's all at a state or a school board level.
Yes, I also think that looking at the policies for accuracy and historical accounts in the curriculum of districts is important, because one of the things that we especially pay a lot of attention when we're curating and researching the books is not only if there's bias, but also we have experts in our team of the literature project that really have a strong historical background and specialization of a lot of nuanced details of the history of the Jews, the history of the land of Israel, and also current events. And so we really pay a special attention to the accuracy of factual information in the books, whether they're fiction or nonfiction. That is very important for us. And we are growing and we're adding more and more books as we come across. As somebody has posted,
Oh, I think we're just losing Janie here.
issue with finding publishers that publish and being people contacting publishers for that. And some of us are exploring the ideas, and Karen has certainly, spoken to publishers as well in terms of, what can be done for books that are out of print, that are fantastic pieces of work that really we could bring back again in a more modern, way to really re-expose kids in schools and libraries with these collections of books that are out of print, and you can find them probably in like the Thrift Books website or other websites that are not your usual ones. I know that we're running out of time, so Chaim, you let us know how we're doing.
We are slightly a bit over, but we could continue, and maybe if anybody wants to stay on, we could wrap up within the next 5 minutes or so. It's still being recorded, so we're okay. But yeah, but we are over the time. But so, Jenny, if anybody has any last words or just want to wrap up, so this might be an opportunity.
And we have several people recommending other titles, and thank you so much. We're definitely working on evaluating and going as fast as we can to adding more book reviews besides the problematic ones that Marjorie has so extensively researched and scholarly written. We are also working on more book reviews being available and finding more books, including the ones that were posted. So thank you so much for recommending more of them. Anybody has any final thoughts or questions, or if there's a question that we missed, please just feel free to unmute yourself and open the conversation.
Hi, Janie.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Shauna. I'm from Jeffa in Ontario. And we've been working, a book reviewing group has been working alongside Camera as well, trying to go through. We scanned the libraries of public boards to see what content are there, and we've been trying to get through reading them and coding them to see whether they are anti-Semitic or not, or the content. So my question is around, and I wrote some of it in the chat. So the school boards, I know York Region has it, I know Peel has it, I know TDSB has it. They have toolkits created. So teachers are given an equity toolkit, and they're supposed to, before reading, especially a picture book or anything they're reading with their class, they're expected to ensure that it's you kind of verify along the toolkit that it doesn't have that kind of bias. It doesn't depict, let's say the Black character as the aggressor, or it has all kinds of like a checklist for a toolkit that teachers are expected to use to ensure that books they are sharing with a class don't promote bias against the Black community, against other communities. So I want to know if any work is being done around creating something like that, where we can actually make a specific toolkit that can be shared with boards, that teachers can check off that no, if it shows a map of Israel and it says Palestine on the map, then that's an anti-Semitic content. You don't share that with your class. Something like that can be shared and promoted within boards. So I wanted to know if Camera has thought of doing anything like that.
Thank you so much. That is something that has really come to our minds. We're in the process of producing a lot of one-pager resources for parents, educators, and librarians on specific topics that have been requested. This is definitely one of them. And as you heard Marjorie compile, what are the biases that we're looking for when we're looking at these books in general? Part of that would be what Marjorie presented. And also, I'm on the board of the Jewish Affair Caucus of the NEA, the National Educators Council, the teacher union. And we actually created an anti-Semitism detection tool that can be used whether it's for code of conduct or curricular materials or books. It's based on IRA, but it is not only IRA. And it lists all the different ways that an event, a curricular material, a teacher, or a student can be anti-Semitic. It's been used, and it's used in schools, distributed at both conventions last year, and we're hearing positive feedback. So this is a tool that people are in the process of being one. So thank you for the process on us to have this be presented. So I'd love to talk to you more about it. And I'm going to post in the chat the one that we created for the NEA. Here it is. You might want to take a look. And if you'd like, Shauna, if you want to send me an email, I'm putting my email here and we can make a time to meet. I would love to follow up on that. Or you can all meet with Karen and Mark as well.
So,
That would be great. Thank you.
we're gonna wrap up here. So you can actually save the chat with all the information. If you go towards the bottom of the chat, you can actually, there's a mechanism there to do so. A lot of valuable information there. On behalf of I think this might be a good time to, this event has been recorded, and we'll have it available. So I like, on behalf of the Association of Jewish Libraries, I'd like to thank everyone who attended today's session, really, for coming out on a Sunday afternoon or evening or morning, depending where you are, to attend it. We had a nice turnout of over 30 attendees, which was very nice.
It's great.
And if Marjorie or Karen have any last words before we sign off, that would be great. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you all so much for coming, and thank you for hosting us.
Our
Thank
pleasure.
you very much.
Marjorie, thank you very, very much. This was wonderful. So have a wonderful day.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.